Hello, I'm Matt Donnelly, and this is Viper Bites as we head into the 2022 season with a primetime preview of the Buffalo Bills and the Los Angeles Rams. Now, without further ado, let's dive right in because we got a lot to cover in a very short period of time, starting with the Bills themselves. The last time that we saw the Bills, they had just been defeated once again by their arch nemesis there in Kansas City, and that was the Chiefs back in the AFC divisional round. That loss in overtime sparked a new overtime rule change, and while it's better late than never, don't mention it to the Buffalo Bills. It's still a pretty fresh wound. Once again, the Bills are favored to win the AFC East after making a big splash in free agency with the addition of Von Miller. Buffalo's lone weakness last season was that pass rush. And when you get yourself one of the best to do it, especially over the last 10 years, you are in a prime position not only to win the division, but the conference as well. For the Los Angeles Rams, they are coming off of a Super Bowl championship. Can the Bills defeat the Rams? Can the Rams avoid the dreaded Super Bowl hangover? How are the Rams feeling after watching Von Miller get a ring? Just to have him lining up opposite of them in this game on Thursday night to kick off the 2022 NFL campaign. The Bills right now are minus 2.5 with an over-under of 52.5. So, hey, this is going to get interesting. Let's dive into the tail of the tape here, starting with the quarterback position and the Buffalo Bills quarterback, Josh Allen. Josh Allen has thrown for more than 4,400 yards and 36 touchdowns in each of the last two seasons. Not to mention, he has rushed for at least 400 yards in each of his four previous seasons as a pro. Last season, Allen completed 63.3% of his passes, on his way to throwing for 4,407 yards and 36 touchdowns. Sound familiar? He also ran the ball 122 times, resulting in 6 more scores and an additional 763 yards. If we add the last two seasons together, the production is staggering. Allen has 8,951 passing yards, which is the 5th most, and 73 passing touchdowns, which is the 4th most, while adding more yards on the ground, 1,184, and 14 more touchdowns. Yeah, he's been pretty good the last few seasons. Now, Aaron Donald versus Josh Allen. This is going to be an interesting game of cat versus mouse. This is a big cat, and this is a big mouse, as Allen will be looking to move off his mark and keep Donald guessing with designed runs and quick passes. If Allen manages to avoid Donald, which he has the ability to do, averaging 6.3 yards per carry and 6 touchdowns last season, then Bobby Wagner won't be too far behind, likely awaiting to see where Josh Allen is going. For the Rams, we got Matthew Stafford, and we have Tre'Davious White, who is out of the Bills secondary. But this secondary, it's still pretty good, and they also have Von Miller to go out there and get after Matthew Stafford. The elbow is still concerning for me, and I would rather take a wait-and-see type of approach entering week number 1. After tossing for the 3rd most yards, 4,886, and completing 67.3% of his passes, and being one of just 2 quarterbacks to throw for more than 40 touchdowns a season ago, what does Matthew Stafford have for an encore? It all starts this Thursday, and it starts by having to avoid Von Miller first and foremost. Buffalo and Miller will look to get pressure on Stafford without blitzing, seeing as though Stafford has been pretty good against the blitz, throwing for the 3rd most passing yards, 2,680, versus the blitz since 2020. Now, turning our attention to the running back position, this is where this game could be won and lost, because neither one of these ground games screams out to me like, I'm going to beat you. But if one of them can have success, that could be the difference maker. For the Bills, Devin Singletary. Singletary earned himself a more prominent role, finishing the season last year, scoring a touchdown on the ground in 6 straight contests, including the playoffs, and 9 total touchdowns over that 6-game span. Thanks to a strong finish, Singletary managed to post 188 runs there for 870 yards and 7 rushing touchdowns to go along with the 4.6 yards per carry, while adding another 40 receptions and 228 yards in the passing game on 50 targets. Singletary would end up as the RB29 last season, averaging 11.6 fantasy points per contest. Behind Singletary, it's like a 3-headed monster. Well, kind of. I mean, it's that 3-headed monster. You got one serious monster, one other serious monster, and that really goofy-looking one. Well, that goofy one is Zach Moss, let's be honest. When a hero rises, it is often because someone else has failed. And Moss, he essentially disappeared last season, opening the door for Singletary's strong finish. Unfortunately, Singletary was rewarded for his efforts by the Bills by them going out there and drafting James Cook in last season's draft. Cook's strength will be his pass-catching ability. He will create mismatches against linebackers in coverage and become an immediate contributor in the passing game. In 2021, while splitting the backfield with Zamir White at Georgia, Cook had 113 carries for 728 yards at 6.4 yards per carry while adding 7 rushing touchdowns. He also chipped in as a pass catcher, hauling in 27 passes for 140 yards and 4 more scores. It's going to be interesting to see what this Singletary, James Cook backfield looks like, especially early on in the season. For the Rams, we got more questions about this backfield heading into this one than maybe we had prior to the season, offseason even beginning. Buffalo was one of the top defenses a season ago, and all they did was get better. Akers has 2 100-yard games to his credit over his career, and they both came in games in which he saw at least 30 touches. I don't see a game script that involves Cam Akers getting 30 touches in week 1, so buyer beware. Well, Akers did suffer some soft tissue type injuries that kind of prevented him from participating in practice as much as we would like to see him heading into this game. The belief is that he's close to 100% recovered from that Achilles surgery. Then again, what does 100% look like? We don't know. We don't really have a setup here which kind of says, hey, Cam Akers is going to be ready to go, because typically, historically speaking, Achilles injuries, they're tough to recover from. Edwin Porras there of Fantasy Points doesn't like Akers' chances of returning to his pre-Achilles injury form, even at the age of 23. If Akers is going to prove the doubters wrong, the first step in his 1,000-mile journey, it begins Thursday against this Bills team. If Akers does falter, Darrell Henderson, if he can stay healthy, is going to be right there with him. In 12 games a season ago, Henderson averaged 4.6 yards per carry on his way to 688 yards on the ground and 5 touchdowns. Look for Henderson and Akers to share carries early and often as they are both recovering from off-season injuries. Henderson also appears to be first in line to receive those passing down snaps after being targeted 40 times in 2021, hauling in 29 of those targets for 176 yards and an additional 3 scores. Now let's turn our attention to the pass catchers, because this is a fantastic group to talk about on both sides of the balls. And the matchups within the matchups is something that we really need to be paying attention to. First, for the Bills, Stefon Diggs. Diggs is a favorite target of Allen's, commanding an impressive 25.2% target share in 2021 with 103 receptions. This after hauling in 127 passes on 166 targets the season prior. Further to the Diggs targeted thing here, he was targeted 29.8% of the time when the Bills reached the red zone, catching 19 of those 34 targets, including 10 touchdowns. Even though Diggs' production in 2021 was a little bit of a dip in production, so to speak, he still ended up with 1,225 receiving yards, which was the 7th most among all pass catchers. Well, the receiver lining up opposite of him this week was the Triple Crown winner in 2021. Diggs remains a dark horse candidate to win it this season after finishing 6th in touchdowns and 8th in receptions as well. Now, the matchup inside the matchup that I like to talk about, how much Jalen Ramsey are we going to see on Stefon Diggs out of the gate? Typically, Ramsey, he doesn't match up. He doesn't really shadow per se, but when you are facing a premier pass catcher such as Diggs, you're going to see Ramsey match up on him more often than not. It's what's going to happen. And this is probably one of the best, if not the best, receiver versus cornerback matchups that the NFL has to offer. History has been on Ramsey's side early on, as in this matchup, Diggs has just 2 catches on 4 targets in 2 contests head-to-head with a touchdown and just 9 receiving yards. So who benefits if we see Ramsey versus Diggs? How about Gabriel Davis, who everyone seems to love to talk about? Gone is Cole Beasley, gone is Emmanuel Sanders. Those 2 alone accounted for 184 targets a season ago. Those targets are a major reason why Gabriel Davis is among the top of the list when it comes to potential breakout wide receivers this season. Well, that and 10 catches and 242 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns worth of production in the Bills' 2 playoff games, that'll also catch people's attention. Look, I want to make sure that everyone is being realistic here. Perhaps Davis does have a breakout in 2022, but in 2021, prior to the playoffs, Davis had only produced 549 receiving yards on 35 receptions, 63 targets, with 6 of those resulting in a touchdown. When Diggs is lining up opposite of you, there's going to be opportunities that you can count on. But is Davis ready to seize those opportunities? Can he turn promise into production? If we are getting that Ramsey-Diggs matchup, that means that Davis is going to have David Long Jr. opposite of him, while Isaiah McKenzie will be looking to exploit Troy Hill and that 125 passer rating in 2021 out of the slot. Speaking of Isaiah McKenzie, like Davis, McKenzie had a relatively quiet 2021 outside of that 11-catch contest against New England back on week 16 that resulted in 125 yards. McKenzie, he absolutely destroyed Jamison Crowder for that starting slot role after the Bills had brought in Crowder specifically for that role in the offseason. We know what the slot receiver is capable of doing in this Buffalo Bills offense. Over the 2 seasons in which Cole Beasley held that role, Beasley would go on to produce 231 receptions on 325 targets for 2,438 yards and 11 touchdowns. Now, enough of these Bills wide receivers. Let's talk about these Rams receivers, including that Triple Crown winner there in Cooper Kupp. Tre'Davious White, he is out of this contest, which bodes well for last season's Triple Crown winner there. Kupp led the league in receptions, 145 on 191 targets, 16 touchdowns, and he also led in yards, obviously, with 1,947. Now, the law of averages would state here that regression is likely to come as those numbers added up to arguably one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver season of all time. Now, we know 2 things here. One, Kevin O'Connell, he is gone. The former offensive coordinator there in Los Angeles, he has taken his trade to Minnesota as the new head coach there. 2, we have so much mystery surrounding Matthew Stafford's elbow that it has to worry some Cooper Kupp managers here and what that production is looking like. Now, Stafford, he is as tough as they come, but at some point, that injury is going to catch up to him. Buffalo's pass defense ranked first in passer rate allowed, completion percentage, and yards per attempt. But as good as Teron Johnson and Dane Jackson are, and Dane Jackson, to his credit, 50% completion percentage on a 70.2 passer rating and 6 starts, neither one of them is Tre'Davious White. And also, Levi Wallace, he left via free agency. So there's a couple little glaring holes in that secondary, but it's still pretty darn good. Now, Allen Robinson makes his Hollywood debut after a nightmarish 2021 season in Chicago. Robinson posted just 38 receptions and 410 yards receiving, which were the lowest of his career outside of that 2017 season in which an injury suffered in week number 1 pretty much ended the season right there on a one-and-done campaign. With Odell Beckham Jr. still a free agent and likely not to come back to Los Angeles, if he comes back to Los Angeles until sometime after Christmas, and Robert Woods now applying his trade in Tennessee, there are roughly 166 vacated targets and 1,492 unaccounted for air yards available and waiting to be picked up. Even with Stafford dealing with that elbow injury, you have to believe a one-arm Matthew Stafford has to be an upgrade on Blake Bortles, on Nick Foles, Mitch Trubisky, Matt McGloin, Christian Hackenberg, Chad Henne. I mean, that is who Allen Robinson has had to work with throughout his career. Now, who is the true Allen Robinson? Is it the one that we saw last season, or is it the one that had back-to-back top 15 fantasy receiver seasons prior to that 2021 season? And then turning our attention to the third option, if I may, in this Rams passing offense, that is Van Jefferson. Now, Kupp and Robinson, they are going to take turns lining up in the slot facing Teron Johnson. Jefferson will be looking to make some big splash plays against Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, which is no easy task. And we all know that if Stafford has eyes for Cooper Kupp, hey, maybe Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are going to have more eyes on Cooper Kupp as well, which is going to pull their attention towards Cooper Kupp, which could open things up downfield for Van Jefferson. Van Jefferson's average depth of target last season was 14 yards, which was the 11th best last season. He would also go on to the 6th most yards per reception, averaging 16. Jefferson also saw an 80% snap share with this Rams last season and a 15.5% target share, even though he played behind Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Odell Beckham Jr. After Van Jefferson, hey man, this depth chart, it drops off drastically unless you happen to be a Ben Skoranek or a Tutu Atwell truther. Now, finally, the tight end position here. We have Dawson Knox for the Bills. Knox was targeted 18 times in the red zone last season, which was at about a 15.8% clip there, hauling in 11 of those passes, 61.1% catch rate with 6 touchdowns. So you know when the Bills are getting down in that area, they're going to look for Stefon Diggs, they're going to look for Gabriel Davis, and they're going to be looking for Dawson Knox. It's going to be pretty well spread out there for the Bills. Knox has been earning Allen's trust each season there as he's improved in a couple statistical categories. First off, his targets have increased from 44 to 71. And also that catch rate has gone up from 54% up to 69%. With 71 targets last season, Dawson Knox would turn that into 49 receptions for 587 yards while finishing with 9 touchdowns in just 15 contests. Tommy Sweeney, He might have been able to beat out O.J. Howard, but he will not be challenging Dawson Knox anytime soon for snaps. So expect Dawson Knox on the field more often than not. Since everyone is already talking about Gabriel Davis and what he was able to do in the playoffs, let's not forget about what Dawson Knox was able to accomplish. 2 touchdowns he added there in the playoffs, and he also has 13 touchdowns in his last 26 contests. It will be up to Ernest Jones, in all likelihood, to try and contain Dawson Knox, especially down in the red zone with a little bit of help from Taylor Rapp and Jordan Fuller looking to lend a hand. Now for the Rams, Tyler Higbee. Buffalo has allowed just 8.44 fantasy points per game to tight ends last season, which was the 4th best mark. And with questions surrounding Matthew Stafford's arm, I am out on Tyler Higbee. Higbee's value comes in catching touchdowns, and Buffalo only allowed 3 touchdowns to tight ends a season ago. Expect Matt Milano there to be matched up with Higbee. Much of this context thanks in large part to the success that he had in coverage just a season ago. Higbee is coming off a season in which he caught 61 passes for 560 yards, 9.2 yards per reception, and 5 touchdowns. He is also returning after a minor knee surgery there after spraining his MCL back in the NFC Conference Championships. Final thoughts? I'm taking the over. I'm excited about what's going to happen in this game. The National Football League could not have asked for a better week 1 matchup than what they have here. This is a potential preview of this year's Super Bowl right here in week number 1. That said, I believe that the Bills can go into Los Angeles and steal a win early on as Von Miller ends up being the difference maker in his Hollywood return. Circle the wagon, Bills Mafia. We've got some stuff going on over at fantasypoints.com right now. We got a full slate of shows starting next week there, starting Monday with the Monday grades with Wes Huber. Tuesday to Friday, you've got the daily lineup with Joe Dolan. You got the Wednesday midweek mailbag with Nick Script. And of course, you got the Friday night hype show with me, Matt Donnelly, coming at you. Use promo code 22Vipers10. Get 10% off that Fantasy Point subscription. And stay tuned to the Vipers Network, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or right here on YouTube, because we have plenty more information coming your way. You do not want to miss out, and we'll see you next time.